Feigned optimism in Big Pharma's biggest event of the year. China quickly becoming the world leader in biotech. The good, the bad, and the ugly things for the industry to look out for in 2026. I'm Matty C, and this is Big Drama in Big Pharma. What's up, nerds? If you're new here, welcome. This is the weekly series where we go through all of the juiciest details in the world of Big Pharma and drug discovery. And this week's drama is focused around a single event, the J.P. Morgan Healthcare Conference, also known as JPM 26. It's basically the Super Bowl for us biotech nerds, as it's the place where all of the big deals happen. It's where all of the biggest biotechs in the world come together to discuss the most important science and their related business cases for the year. They try and tackle things like how they focus on the newest, best innovations coming through the pipeline, and what types of collaborations need to happen in order to make those innovations become a reality. And who's going to slap some fat stacks on the table and make all that happen? So every year, the biotech world tunes in to see C-level suites make these big pharma deals that set the tone for the rest of the year. Usually, if there's big investment at JPM, there's big investment throughout the industry. After a relatively down year in 2025, excitement was very high coming into this year's JPM as a number of blockbuster deals were made just prior to the conference starting. The industry spent over $3 billion in venture capital and merger activities in the first 2 weeks of January of this year alone. But then the first few days of the conference happened, and it looked a little more like not a single deal was done on the first day. Some calling this the slowest JPM for news in a long time. And the markets agreed. XBI, the main biotech-based stock market index, flatlined for the rest of the show because there weren't any juicy deals being made. But some experts are staying positive. Big-time biotech investor Alexis Borisy thinks that they're in the early innings of an upswing. Now, they can't be entirely sure because when you're down in the trough, when things have been as bad as biotech has been in the last year, you can have false dawns, and you can bounce along down there for a long period of time. Experts in the US are really hoping that they can turn themselves around, dig themselves out of this trough really soon, because if they don't, there's going to be a new king sitting atop their throne. And that king comes from China. According to SCMP, Chinese companies were the beneficiaries of more than 150 out-licensing deals that were made in 2025, totaling $136 billion. Which accounted for 37% of the world's total out-licensing deals. For those who are new, out-licensing deals is when a bigger company pays a smaller company to use their assets, use one of the compounds that they created. The smaller company still owns that compound, they still own the intellectual property around that, but they are just allowing the bigger company to borrow it and use it for a new defined treatment. It's kind of like how Netflix pays for the license for certain movies to show on their platform. Netflix shows this movie to its subscribers, the viewers get to enjoy it, but Netflix never actually owned the movie in the first place. In pharma, this can manifest in a few different ways, but one example from last year is how Pfizer licensed a bispecific antibody from 3S Bio. Meanwhile, Pfizer is trying to grow out their anti-cancer portfolio, and turns out this bispecific antibody is specific to two protein targets that are commonly found on a lot of different cancers. So Pfizer pays 3S Bio a measly $1.25 billion up front, in order to use this bispecific antibody to develop new treatments. 3S Bio still owns the antibody, but Pfizer can tweak it and use it however they want, within the terms of their licensing deal, of course. This is amazing growth considering last year in 2024, there were 94 licensing deals worth $51 billion, making up only 27% of the world's out-licensing deals. And the year before that, in 2023, it was only 19%. Seeing this type of growth in just a 3-year span is genuinely mind-blowing. China's success is anything but accidental. They've been investing heavily in the biotech sector for over 20 years now. And for a number of different factors, Chinese companies are now able to bring products from the lab to the clinic much faster and for much cheaper than what most other companies around the world can do. From the ground up, they've prioritized innovation and innovating quickly. Now, the US has not had the same success recently. In fact, they're going backwards, and it's their own fault. More specifically, it's their fault. I'm not alone in saying that the FDA might have had the most tumultuous year in their entire history. A team out of RBC conducted a recent poll among biotech investors and found that more than half pointed to the unpredictable regulatory climate as the sector's biggest issue, the reason why this dip is so prominent. Their decisions over the last year have been inconsistent at best and flat out anti-scientific at worst. I've gone over a lot of these issues in the last few videos, but A quick summary would include significant cuts to research and manufacturing funding, in some cases for no good reason at all, pharmaceutical-based tariffs which force companies to divest out of innovating and into manufacturing in certain locations in the US, regulations and approval processes for new drugs that changed on a dime, top-ranking officials doing a shit job and getting fired for gross misconduct, and good officials retiring early because of the misconduct from said directors. When the FDA is unstable and unpredictable, their ability to approve new drugs and review clinical trials is also unpredictable. Unpredictability makes investors worry, thus pulling money out of the sector. But for many Western experts, and honestly most people in the world, this could be a really good thing. Like in most industries, competition is good. It forces all parties to do better and do better quicker. I like this quote in particular from big-time biotech investor John Maraganore, where he says, "I'm a big believer that innovation should come from anywhere in the world. We should take this as a Sputnik moment. Look around at what we do as an industry and figure out how to do it better." Because after all, what's really driving this China wave right now is their ability to get clinical data cheaper and faster. Speaking of the US, but it applies to anywhere really, those are things that we should be able to do in this country if we just let it happen. Now that requires some regulatory reform and some health policy reform, which is what we should really be thinking about here. And it's not just a two-horse race. Even European agencies are getting in the mix as they just committed $10 billion for funding new initiatives in biopharma and biotech research, one of their biggest funding commitments in the last decade. Many see the solutions quite simple. Tighten up the FDA, get more investment, get back on track. John Maraganore even said, "All of us are hoping that things settle down and we get a more consistent FDA. Only if we see delays, if we see inconsistencies, and we see a lack of stability at the FDA, then that would be a cause for more concern." Buddy, you're not going to like the sound of this. The FDA didn't do themselves any favors to their reputation by delaying the approvals of several drugs that they previously promised would get accelerated approvals. Eli Lilly, Sanofi, Boehringer Ingelheim, and Disc Medicines all received a national priority voucher late in 2025. This voucher was designed to give accelerated approvals to some of their new upcoming drugs that had very promising early clinical data that aligned with American national priorities, reducing their time to be reviewed by the FDA from 12 months down to just 2 months. And as of last week, all of the drugs that were assigned this national priority voucher are now going to have delayed FDA responses for at least a couple months. There aren't too many public details as to why these delays are happening. But as of right now, the reports are saying that there is skepticism around the safety and/or efficacy of these new drugs. Now, without the details, it's hard for me to give too hard of an opinion here, other than obviously this is horrible news. You never want to see these types of detrimental side effects in any clinical trial, but it's not unheard of for data to look good in a smaller phase 2 clinical trial, and then as soon as you go to a phase 3 clinical trial, like what we see in these cases, there are bound to be side effects in a handful of patients when you're dealing with hundreds. That all being said, I do agree with delays in this case. If the FDA is skeptical on the efficacy or the safety of a certain new drug, they should take extra time to review it. If there are concerns, pause everything for a second, take a step back, do some more studies, and prove that it's as safe as the company is claiming, and prove that the drug is worth the risk. But this does give me issues with the priority voucher system as a whole. Now, if you've been watching the channel for a while, you know that I already had issues with this priority voucher for reasons like this. The FDA has provided basically zero details into how these approvals would become faster. It genuinely just feels like it was off of vibes and friendship, which, as we can now see, you need more than just vibes and friendship to properly analyze a new pharmaceutical. And the worst part is the FDA has other established programs for accelerating drugs along, using data and using good science. And instead of using those as a framework, they're just making it up as they go along. This voucher system is completely antithetical to the thing it was trying to do. Pharma companies have had to waste a ton of money and time to try and get one of these vouchers, rather than investing that time and money into better innovations. It's adding even more chaos in an already chaotic system. We're going to take a quick break from the drama in JPM 26 and explore other stories that happen in the world of pharma in a classic Matty speed round. And back to the government for a quick second. Trump claims that he's going to stop the health insurance problem in America by removing health insurance companies in America. Now, I'm being dramatic, but he says he's starting a plan where instead of having the insurance companies pay you out, the US government will pay you directly. Now, I would dive into this more, but to be honest, he was incredibly light on the details. I have no idea if this is going to be good or bad. It really depends how he chooses to implement it. I don't want to keep talking about this guy in the FDA. Let's just move on. Novo Nordisk is bolstering biotech innovations in Europe by committing $850 million to their charity arm. The majority of this funding will go to startup companies who are in the biotech field, who are located in Denmark, because that's where Novo Nordisk is headquartered, but they will be sprinkling it throughout the continent. This is just another great example of using charity funds for biotech research that has been in the news recently. And finally, Robert Kramer, former CEO of Emergent Biosolutions, is being sued for insider trading that netted him over $10.1 million. He allegedly sold off a significant number of stocks after he knew of a mishap that affected manufacturing of certain COVID vaccine batches, but before the anticipated dip in share price was made public, which honestly is a pretty good idea if you want to go to jail.
Oh, if you like prison food and penis.
In some ways, this insider trading scandal is a perfect representation of the old way of doing things in biotech. The Wild West era of biotech, if you will. An era that, as we look forward to 2026, has given the industry a little bit of PTSD. Investors don't want to provide any money to help with initial public offerings or IPOs, basically where a budding biotech company is able to go public and have a stock price. Because in the past, investors have been bitten in the ass way too many times. The reasons for this are kind of sweet. In the past, a lot of biotech investors just got too excited. It was common for these young drug companies to have these fantastical goals to go public and develop these medicines that seems really innovative at the time, but the actual business model around them were really fuzzy. Eventually, all of that hype came to a head. Many of these companies suffered greatly when eventually the market corrected for those fuzzy business practices. This frustrated public investors and caused many generalists that had fueled the sector's run to turn away from biotech. Which, hey, if I invested millions of dollars into something and found out that it was not nearly as effective as we thought, I'd be a little salty too. There were certain types of companies that were hit particularly hard with this stigma. In particular, platform technologies that were related to cell and gene therapies. Here's a quick example of how that would work. Let's start with explaining cell therapies. Cell therapies can be broadly categorized as treatments that involve editing different cell types in order to treat that disease. So for example, once you remove healthy T cells from a patient, you can use little viruses or man-made nanoparticles to insert genes and proteins that allow these healthy T cells to now detect surface proteins that are only expressed on cancer cells. This T cell, a part of the immune system that is able to detect and kill pathogens, can now detect and kill cancer. So researchers take this new cell, put it back into the patient, and allow them to do their work. Now, platform technologies are a little more broad. They really just mean any kind of technology or technique that can be tweaked just slightly enough to change how they're used. So in the example of cell therapies, a platform cell therapy, instead of using these new T cells just for, say, lung cancer, you can tweak which proteins are added to the T cells to target a different type of cancer or a liver disease. Now, I designed a new platform technology for my PhD, so this is very near and dear to my heart. And I can understand why people are so excited about it. The goals were to reduce cost and reduce time to get to the clinic. And we've seen many examples that are clinically and commercially available versions of this type of treatment. So we know that it works. The problem is that oftentimes it doesn't. And even if it does work, it is still incredibly expensive to do. Even nowadays, a single dose for a single patient that needs a cell or a gene therapy often costs up to $2 million, if not a little more. Now, the downstream effects of this is really concerning because it forces drug developers to either or get off the pot. While reflecting on a recent failure of a cell and gene therapy, Japanese pharma company Takeda said that when we started to look at the opportunities in our pipeline and the portfolio beyond cell therapies, other types of medicines, it was hard to justify the spend to support that platform. If you can't afford to innovate in this particular way, it might be best to invest in something else that could also help a different patient population. But again, this caution can be a good thing. Being more cautious forces you to be more locked in and more strategic with where that money is going. So in 2025, for example, even though there were fewer companies who were successful enough to go public, all of the companies that received IPOs had drugs in at least phase 2 testing or later. The majority of those companies have been growing steadily, which almost always correlates with good scientific and clinical data. In the case of Metsera, they grew enough to be bought by Pfizer for $10 billion. And experts are arguing that this performance suggests that young drug companies have become better and more efficient, and their backers have become more disciplined. So this, just like a lot of the other stuff we were talking about at the beginning of the video, doesn't necessarily mean that biotech is dying. It just means that it has to play safer. Sure, companies don't have as much money to invest in new innovations themselves, but they do have lots of money to license technologies from other companies. These days, it's typically Chinese ones. And the companies that do get larger investments and are able to go public, they've shown to be more successful, at least more successful than they were in the recent past. What started as a very underwhelming JPM 26 might actually give some very positive and very exciting outlooks into the rest of the year. In my opinion, the key takeaways, I don't think we're going to see any differences in the US anytime soon. I think they've already broken the camel's back. Yes, the FDA is still the most important regulatory agency in the world, most of the other agencies follow suit based on what the FDA does. But the rest of the world is also learning very quickly as to what not to do. I also think the Chinese growth is inevitable. Chinese companies deserve their flowers for the way they've been investing and the way the government has been supporting them in bringing up those technologies. And a lot of other countries are using them as an example of a good way of developing themselves. And this might not be a surprise for most of you, but yeah, scientists are really stubborn. They'll make the innovative treatments that they need to, even with all the bullshit. But that's all for me today. Thank you all for stopping by, and you stay classy, nerds.